Hello, and welcome to the Tugol podcast. My name is Andrew.
And I'm Josh.
And the topics we're going to talk about today include copyright and the many issues about it, and the crisis in Greece that is currently continuing. Josh will be leading the discussion because he knows more about copyright than I do, necessarily. And to be honest, will probably be more objective. So.
Alright, so let's hop right in. Shall we?
Yep.
Alright, let's do it. So copyright infringement. Copyrights are just one of the ways that intellectual property is protected under law. You've got three main ways that intellectual property is protected. You've got patent infringement, patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Trademarks are basically used to identify businesses and basically sort of aligned groups of interests. Copyrights cover all sorts of things, but are mostly used for intellectual property that does not represent a physical commodity. So something like music, literature, these are things that would be covered by copyrights. And then patents would be used to cover inventions, ideas, and processes. Not ideas, but rather inventions and manufacturing processes, and in some cases, slightly broader definitions of what a product is. Also plant varieties. Yep, you can patent plant varieties as well. Anyway, and that's an oversimplification because law is actually much more complicated. But that's basically sort of something that these basic categories exist in many countries in Europe and in America and across the world, and they're the most common core sort of legislative ideas behind intellectual property. But let's first define intellectual property. What is intellectual property? So, Andy, what do you think of when you think of intellectual property?
When I think of intellectual property, I think of an archaic system of ownership, and I mean necessarily in the negative sense because of my experience and my friend's experience with it. I remember back in high school when subsequently I had, additionally I had a person who was in my class and actually decided to copy a Windows 7 disk. And the professor actually told Microsoft, and Microsoft actually sued him, and he was actually expelled. Now, I don't have to, I don't think, explain to our listeners...
On what grounds was he expelled?
Copyright infringement. But I mean, I don't have to explain to our listeners how ludicrous it is for an idea that Bill Gates copyrighted that was stolen from Xerox, not even his original idea, to basically...
Well, I mean, it's not the idea that's being stolen, it's the software itself in this case.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, still a stolen piece of whatever.
Yeah, no. There's hypocrisy built into here. But he's not just stealing from Bill Gates in that case. He's stealing from everyone who depends on the profits from that product. So, the coders, the janitors. I mean, that's theoretically why. Now, I mean, what you're pointing to though is where we do want to take this discussion at some point, but there's basically, the idea of intellectual property is at its core a form of social control. Um, and I'm not, the first to come to this conclusion. But before we sort of jump off the rails entirely and start, sort of deconstructing what intellectual property is, I think we should mention. I mean, Andy, do you think it would be a good idea to mention why this issue came up in the first place? Or, I mean, I wouldn't be talking about this if we hadn't gotten flagged for copyright infringement.
But yeah. So
I mean, we don't need to call out, individual corporations necessarily.
yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. But anyway, um, we got tagged for copyright infringement on two of our sites on which we host this podcast, YouTube and SoundCloud. SoundCloud and YouTube, respectively. YouTube being more lenient with their copyright policies. Who knew? With Google.
Oh yeah, they actually have a whitelist and a blacklist for YouTube now, so they do they're trying.
But anyway, SoundCloud actually requested that with public domain and Creative Commons audio that we have a court order to show that it is actually public domain or under a Creative Commons license.
Huh. So which one was that?
That was our video with the Billie Holiday intro and also the intro from Iran,
Wow.
but they eventually let that go.
One should hope so. That was a recording that was, like, in the Library of Congress, like, specifically as an American heritage recording. So, sort of disputing it under, United States law to say that we were, like, infringing on anyone's right to make money off of it. Well, I mean, we made sure to use the right version of the recording and everything, so.
But I think
Yeah. Anyway.
I think what the problem was with that was that SoundCloud is actually hosted in Germany, and it's under German law compared to U.S. law.
Oh, interesting. That is interesting because I'm not sure in that case. It would come down to what they define as an archive, right? Because the United States Library of Congress is defined first and foremost as an archive, and so information in an archive can be made available to the public at the discretion of the entity operating the archive, and that's common to both laws. But if it's a library and not an archive, I'm not sure it would be protected under German law. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, basically, I mean, this was sort of an eye-opener to me because, both Andy and I don't mind talking for him when I say that we both try really hard to end up on the right side of the law. And not just that, but on the right side of ethics in general. So it was sort of surprising to, basically have someone say that the content that we had posted was somehow, infringing on someone else's rights.
That someone being dead for around 40 or 60 years.
Well, Billie Holiday's estate is still makes a lot of money, so I mean the rights to, her music and such are now privately owned by someone obviously other than the ghost of Billie Holiday. It could be a relative, it could not be. I don't know, to be honest.
I know that the original recordings are public domain, and the re-records by Sony or by any other recording studio are copyrighted. And we use the... we use the other
That
recordings.
brings. Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Go ahead.
No. What you said there is right. We didn't use Sony's remastered version. But that brings up something interesting, which is a really big question because um, there's basically several categories that information can fall under, or intellectual property can fall under. If it's not claimed by a person, is it public domain? And the question is, effectively, legally, there's actually very little that you can prove is in the public domain. There's stuff that's protected by various organizations that like license organizations. The U.S. Patent Office, is in charge of protecting, inventions and you've got trade organizations that often will aid in identifying, various other kinds of intellectual copyright or intellectual property infringements. And so, what is the public domain? Like, after it's basically what people aren't fighting over, right? I mean, it's what people aren't contesting or claiming, because if someone's claiming it, then it's contested ownership, and it's not in the public domain. It might revert to the public domain pending some kind of ruling, but if it's contested, then it's contested. That's a separate category. And so one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of on the internet is there's a lot of people throwing around this phrase public domain. Well, what is the public domain? And as best I can tell, I mean, there's actually precious little that qualifies as being in the public domain. There's that which is commonly used. So, natural language is in the public domain. Dictionaries are not in the public domain, but natural language is. You've got things like national anthems, not recordings of national anthems, but the music itself. Not those are in the public domain. Flags are in the public domain, although those are actually a separate specific category because you can get in trouble for burning a flag, for example. So, yeah. So the public domain is pretty small.
Interestingly enough, the Confederate flag is in the public domain now.
Well, that's a pretty interesting question. I would argue that it is in most of America because no one is claiming to it would be impossible to trademark it because it's in such common usage already, and because it's an image that exists in so many state flags that I mean, even if those flags change, it'll still be in the public domain. Once something enters the public domain, it's there forever, theoretically, because it would be impossible to remove something from the collective consciousness. Although, in effect, that does actually happen. Say there's 100 years, fashion has changed such that we forget how to weave fibers into a certain way, and polyester is no longer used. Well, if someone discovers polyester 200 years from now, and no one contests it, they can repatent it. And assuming the information about a pre-existing patent for polyester has been lost, that's now their intellectual property. And so effectively, They see something that used to be in the public domain.
But I guess one thing I wanted to get at with this is so do you think you could make the argument that nowadays copyright, intellectual property, patents, and royalties are counterintuitive to human culture and humanity?
Well, that's a really complicated question. I'm going to provide two answers that don't necessarily agree with each other, because from an economics perspective, the answer is maybe. The answer is maybe, because the important part about protecting intellectual property is that without innovation, without incentivized innovation, society will theoretically stagnate. And, if people can't make money off of, new ideas, well then there's no reason for them to share those ideas. And so, from sort of an Ayn Rand perspective, where it's assumed that capitalism is like a good thing, basically, or rather that, economics, are sort of how we attempt to, you know, take value from life. Then yes, maybe we need these laws in place to police intellectual property. Maybe, that's actually the only thing keeping innovation occurring. And then my other answer is that, well, maybe not. I mean, from a certain perspective, um, the 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 public domain is getting smaller, not larger. And all these businesses that are making money off of off of information are essentially slowing down the process of human evolution. I mean, never before in the history of the world have we had such things as the internet. Have we had, telecommunications, which allow us to learn and to express and to communicate very rapidly over vast distances. And so it's increasingly difficult even to prove what original ownership of an idea. In fact, it's getting more and more common that independently people are developing the same products. In some cases, in complete isolation from each other, simply because the the fuel that our minds run on is so abundant. The information, more information is more readily available than ever has been before to an individual, in the historical sense. So these are basically the reason I wanted to answer it two ways and to provide those two contrasting opinions is because I think they represent sort of a struggle that's going on in the world right now, whereby there are a lot of people whose lives and livelihoods more realistically. It's not like their lives are on the line, but their livelihoods depend on intellectual property and the enforcement of intellectual property laws. But there's a lot of people who would stand to benefit from having access to intellectual property. And so I sort of tend to feel like I identify more with the latter crowd, those who would benefit from information. I think in sort of in line with what Richard Stallman argues, that the term intellectual property is sort of systematically distorts and confuses the central issues, which is that laws are basically being used in many cases against what is in the best interest of all of us collectively.
I agree. I mean, I actually heard Richard Stallman speak when I was a kid, and he motivated a lot of different parts of my life. I have a signed GNU up here on my desk, and
Oh, I had no idea. I had no idea that. That's cool.
I was very honored to get to listen to him, even though my father called him a communist. But that's a whole.
Well, he is. I mean, at his core, I mean, a lot of his ideas are, very much aligned with the idea of a communal best interest.
But I mean, not all ideas are good and not all ideas are bad, and subsequently, I think that it's not a sum of ideas. It's each individual idea taken in its own context in the world or universe, however you want to put it. You know what I mean, Josh?
No, could you explain?
So, what I learned,
Yeah, go ahead.
what I learned from him was subsequently that copyright is an archaic form of ownership in techies' opinions. You know, people like me, and we we feel that even culture basically moves towards subverting actively copyright in every technological form. We see this with the Pirate Bay, we saw it with Napster, we saw it with, I forget what basically precluded Spotify on the internet, you know. Even companies now are trying to put their music online for supposedly free if you listen to 5 ads every hour, you know. And I feel that intellectual property, copyright, and everything else will become less and less important in society as the law changes around ownership. I mean, people are less concerned about owning something than creating an idea, reverse engineering something, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree with you. But we have to be aware that not everyone falls on the libertarian sort of end of that argument.
I mean,
But
is
what can
innovation
you do?
is innovation more important than the sum of the parts of an idea? You know what I mean?
Well, I think innovation will occur without economic incentives. I mean, every day you have people who just, they want to do things better. They want things to be more efficient. And it's because there's a sort of a beauty to that aesthetic. There's a sort of a very, people crave, the sort of simplicity and the sort of the wonderfulness that comes from, the pursuit of perfection. Oh, that was a trademarked phrase I just said. I won't say who's. That's what was that? Was that BMW's? The pursuit of perfection?
I don't think I've ever heard that,
I don't
to
know.
be honest, but
No, I watch too much TV probably.
I
So
doubt.
how are we doing on time?
We're at 8 minutes until we can talk about our next topic.
Oh, okay. So
I think the only thing that we didn't cover was royalties. Do you want to explain the difference between royalties, patents, and public domain?
well, royalties would be what a person makes off of. I mean, royalties are, you know, I mean, they're completely different. Royalties are the the money that someone would be, owed because of theoretical ownership of an idea or being able to prove, or if they've gotten it copyrighted, they can get royalties. Is basically what happens, or they can do the same with a patent. I don't know how trademarks work in that regard, but I mean, I'm sure theoretically, no, I don't know how trademarks would work in that regard, but yeah, it's just a way of monetizing intellectual property is what royalties are. Um, a way of yeah.
Can can you think of anything else we haven't talked about?
No, no, that's why I'm sort of floundering. I could throw out a pimp quote from Thomas Jefferson.
Sure, let's hear it.
All right. So if nature has made one thing less susceptible than all others of exclusive property, it is the action of the thinking power called an idea, which an individual may exclusively possess as long as he keeps it to himself. But the moment it is divulged, it forces into the possession of everyone, and the receiver cannot dispossess himself of it. Its peculiar character, too, is that no one possesses the less, because every other possesses the whole of it. He who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me.
Hmm. So,
I mean, it sort of points at this sort of artificial scarcity. That's, people, if you share an idea, does it take away from someone's right to make money off of it?
interesting. Well, sure it'll continue to be debated. Do you want to talk about our last topic?
Yeah, yeah, sure. We only got two topics today. Um, it's been a sort of slow in the news, but this one's been a long time coming, because it's been in the news, and it's been a pretty significant event. Greece, and the euro. It's becoming increasingly likely that, you know, even though they are already in default, several times over, that Greece just won't be able to, their economy simply won't recover. And one of the indications for this is if you look at what's happening, in terms of their population demographics. The young people of Greece are simply leaving Greece. They're fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. It's scary, because if things keep going in the way that it seems as if they're going, that you know Greece is going to slip backwards from uh, from the sort of the state of economic. I mean, we don't actually know what's going to happen, is the scary part. But it doesn't sound like it would be good. I mean, it's anyway. So if you haven't been following the issue, Greece uh, got on the euro, and they are part of the European Union. However, they keep needing large bailouts, in order to basically just to just for the people to to survive. And it's getting bad. Like, there's investors are pulling out, and the European Union has these mechanisms in place to try and prevent investors from pulling out of a region too quickly. But in the case of Greece, it hasn't really worked that way, and there's just been both sort of a massive sort of a capital migration, and sort of a both of social capital and of investment capital from Greece, and we're left with a country that's sort of like teeteringly desperate on the brink of social unrest. I mean, I applaud the Greek government for keeping people from rioting for as long as they have, essentially, because it's scary. The numbers are scary.
But I when I went to Europe in 2013, I saw signs of this because the immigration that Polish people and necessarily Czech people and Slovaks were telling me of Greek citizens fleeing to the other European Union countries in large number. It's seen the largest immigration in history. I don't know if you've heard of this, Josh. Josh?
No, I've heard this. Yeah.
But, I mean, anyway, it's quite disconcerting. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, sort of a naivety of visiting a completely different country. Hardly anyone gets out of their home country and visits another, or 3 or 4. But anyway, I don't know what to think about Greece. I mean, I feel like their best option would be to leave the European Union in default and restart, because they are eventually going to get to a point, like you said, they're not going to be able to restart their economy, even with economic help from other countries, you know?
Well, I mean, if Greece were a business, the first thing would be to declare bankruptcy. But the problem is, every time they declare bankruptcy, they just get more loans, right? And the problem is, you can't really invest your way out of a situation that's got such a strong demographic component to it. You've got, you know, the average Greek having trouble with mortgage payments, and no amount of money from the top down is gonna bring the businesses back into Greece. It's gonna bring the young people, with good job prospects to come back. There's just a vacuum of social capital there now. But it, unlike the vacuums of nature, this is one that's going to drive people away from the area. So it's I mean, the real question is, how far will it slip? And I don't think anyone really knows. I mean, I think everyone sort of hopes that, Greece will sort of fall back on its agrarian roots, and sort of, self-isolate for a little while and regrow its internal economy so that it can start to compete in the global arena again, when it's ready. But I mean, I think the first step would definitely be to, that a rapid demographic shift needs to take place. But the problem with that is that there's, if you look at, the age of the people in Greece, you've got a lot of old people in Greece. And, farming is a young person's work. And so it's arguable whether, even with a sort of a determined shift towards an agrarian economy, would even allow them to competition. I think if if the euro really wants to bail Greece out, instead of keeping them in sort of perpetual economic slavery, they should stop sending them money and start sending them food. Because if there's anything to be salvaged from the sort of the collapse of the Greek financial system, it's going to be salvaged by, first and foremost, keeping the Greeks alive and healthy as long as possible. So they should be sending food, they should be sending doctors, and I I know it's not as bad in Greece as it is in some parts of the world, but what you have to understand, or what I see as the most dangerous part of that, the Grecian problem, is that once you start slipping in that direction, it is difficult to change, to sort of to stop things from falling apart completely. And I just it's if for no other reason than because it would make for a better neighbor, if they were to if Europe were to
Allow it to collapse.
yeah. Yeah, I don't really think the European Union is going to be going on any great diplomatic missions, though, because they are basically a large trade organization, and their first and foremost, responsibility is, I mean, it's not that they have a responsibility to chase economic incentives, but rather the people who, basically make up the European Union, at its core, are big believers in, economic imperative that, and, it will probably be less costly for them, at least in the short term, to simply cut Greece off altogether and ignore the social problems that are occurring next door. However, I think the long-term problem of being a bad neighbor sort of might come back to haunt Europe. You've got, I mean, can you see ISIS spreading to Greece? Because I can see, I can see that happening.
Well, I'd be more concerned about the neo-Nazi movement in Greece. I mean, they could potentially gain power.
That is a problem. I mean, there's poverty is no picnic, and there are, in this modern world we live in, a lot of there's some well-tread paths towards taking advantage of poverty. Taking advantage of the disadvantaged.
If I were to look at it from that perspective of a group taking potential control over the government either by force or being elected, it would be the neo-Nazi movement in Greece. I forget the exact name of it. I thought it was Cyprus or something. But this movement actually took hold in Ukraine during the Ukraine crisis. I don't know if you've heard of the neo-Nazis taking a third of the government.
No, I didn't know. That was in Ukraine?
Yeah. The neo-Nazis basically joined with two other left parties. The neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine is called Right Sector. The other two, I don't remember the names. But anyway, it's not important. So the context is that you have potential racist, xenophobic, neo-Nazi, violent extremists taking a part of the government and essentially helping to stabilize the country. And while they have a minimal role in government, it still is worrisome. It's kind of how the real Nazis came to power back in Germany,
Yeah, no, I mean, it is similar economic conditions that, allow people to easily be taken advantage of, to be bullied into an ideology that is based on hatred and greed.
But, so, do you think we can talk about this a little bit more?
I'm out. I mean, I would just sort of end it here and make a sort of a final plea to listeners to, give us your feedback, your comments, and anything you can do to sort of give us a push in the right direction, we appreciate. And I'm not sure about anything else on Greece.
I mean, I would appreciate the same thing that Josh is saying, but to the same regard, I mean, it's a work in progress. I mean, it's not going to be. We're not going to instantly become expert podcasters. Tector actually ran their 300th episode before they amounted a substantial amount of listeners. I don't know if you've heard of this, Josh.
No, that makes sense, though. I mean, it takes time, you know. You got to build up a listenership. You've got to, you know, become more comfortable with the medium. But I think we're on the right track because, well, because I enjoy talking with you. If for no other reason than that, I find our talks interesting and engaging, and I hope that everyone else finds them as interesting. And if not, you know, no trouble. But you know, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and thank you to the Comenius Project with the intro audio to our podcast. And I guess that concludes our podcast here. Thank you for listening.